Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Da oggi in cucina crea tu. Creo io. Sì, con Crea tu. Orogel crea i mix di verdure pronte tutte italiane. Tu crea tutto. Crea primi, secondi, contorni, antipasti e fuoripasti. Orogel crea tu. Crea tutto quello che vuoi tu.
quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale. Non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Da oggi in cucina crea tu. Creo io. Sì, con Crea tu. Orogel crea i mix di verdure pronte tutte italiane. Tu crea tutto. Crea primi, secondi, contorni, antipasti e fuoripasti. Orogel crea tu. Crea tutto quello che vuoi tu.
serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buongiorno.
Good morning and welcome to this first meeting that is going to deal with economic issues under the title Supporting Development and Policies for an Innovative Economy. As almost all newspapers and TVs have stressed so far, these are fundamental issues for the Rimini meeting. An inextinguishable friendship has to deal with the life of people, and a number of questions are being raised on current affairs. I keep on saying that, of course, it's important to focus on current issues. However, we also need to have a model to aspire to. Otherwise, we won't be able to manage current issues as well. So the idea of the Rimini meeting is basically to look at things from above in order to understand them better. That's why we have here today different interlocutors who can provide us with an overall view, and they can give us their view on overall issues. One is basically the type of development that we wish to achieve. We presented it here at the Rimini meeting with President of ISET Brangiardo, so from the GDP to other indicators, and then actually what kind of models we can aspire to after neoliberalism. What should the model of the state and of others be? These are the main topics that we wish to develop with specific questions that we would like to pose to everybody. The first one is Stefano Barrese, who is in charge of Banca dei Territori of Intesa Sanpaolo. Then we have Francesco Mutti, who is the CEO of Mutti SPA and the president of Centromarca. Bianca Farina, the president of Ania, which is the association bringing together insurance companies. She is connected from remote. And then we have Giancarlo Giorgetti, our minister for the Economy and Finance. He is currently traveling. He's going to a funeral of state because of the death of two finance officers. And so he's attending the funeral, and in spite of that, he will be still connected with us from remote. In spite of the difficult conditions, I think this is a real testimony of friendship, the very fact that he decided to connect with us. So thanks wholeheartedly for your participation. in spite of the circumstances. We were going to have two parts. We have questions to our three interlocutors, so questions posed to the three interlocutors, and then the minister will kind of draw to a close at the end of the presentations. I'd like to start from Mr. Barrese. Mr. Barrese is one of the most important representatives of Banca Intesa. And I have a question. What is a bank? Banks are normally the place where profits are made. And what is it that banks have objectives of sustainable development? How come that a bank who's supposed to do profits actually is thinking about, has thought about a new development model? Can you please explain this? Thank you very much, Giorgio, and thanks to all those who are participating. This question might appear complicated, actually, if you consider that making profits is the only objective that a bank has. In my view, we always have to start from the actual, from the real objectives that banks have to set themselves. As regards business activities, I believe that the real objective should be first and foremost the individual, the person, so the beneficiary of the direct or indirect services that banks generate. And of course, businesses have to generate profits because these are functional to their very livelihood. But the issue is how to do business. Specifically, a bank should guide their activities in order to support communities and territories, support those who do business in turn, and support those who wish to start a business, be they individual businesses, so for example professional firms, or actually new businesses, new enterprises. Banks have to support them with the means in the right time in order for these entrepreneurs to do their business and be successful. So banks have to kind of bring all these aspects together under the same umbrella. This is, of course, difficult. This implies assessment. Banks provide entrepreneurs with credit, and of course they have to assess the kind of credit that they're giving to businesses, but at the same time they have to make the most so that access to credit makes it possible for those who don't have the means to basically develop the potential which is very much functional to development. There is no development in a country if we do not give the possibility to those who have potential to develop this potential. This is, of course, a very complicated activity. For example, within our banks, we do this with the so-called impact activities. So, for example, activities targeted to the third sector, which bring with itself basically these activities. The third sector is mistakenly called non-profit making sector. In fact, this is not the case. It is a profit-making sector, at least marginally, because there has to be the ability to kind of assess risks so that they can carry out their activities and that there can be an impact on the whole of society that nobody else would guarantee. And this then applies, the same concepts apply also to risk activities. Another group is, for example, that of young people, young students. Not everybody has access to education or with the possibility of having necessary funds. So financing education is one of the very first missions that we set ourselves inside the bank. It is fundamental that we guarantee all those who wish to be educated and who can do this, that they have the means to study, maybe in a different city from the place where they come from. And being able to access to loans that can be, for example, reimbursed in 30 to 40 years at really manageable interest rates is one of the first duties of banks, because this leads me back to development. If we don't give young generations the possibility of receiving a high and qualified education, sustainable education for the societies where they live, actually we are not guaranteeing a future to ourselves in the very first place. So the banking activity is our first duty, and that's basically the duty of all companies who work in a country. And this also implies the focus on qualitative parameters. So we are adding basically significant factors. It's meaningless if you achieve targets if you do not basically focus and generate also quality. This can be direct with the activity that we do, or indirect. So we also do a lot of things, but we don't know. Many people don't know that this is done. For example, last year, for example, we supported 30 million people through meals or clothing or drugs. In our country, differences and inequalities are becoming larger and larger, so the possibility of returning important aspects of these profits is very important. And it is also needed basically to guarantee cohesion in society, so that we have everybody be part of a virtuous circle, and this in turn reduces differences. And this is also part, an integral part of an exhibition that is currently here on display at the Rimini meeting. I confirm what Mr. Barrese has just said. Last year, when we presented the report on subsidiarity and sustainable development, actually we saw that participating in the third sector indeed generates development. Today, actually, we also have a major entrepreneur, and I think that all of us has enjoyed one of the products that your company produces. When it comes to business, when it comes to enterprises, of course, companies are in favor of development. What does it mean for an entrepreneur today to pursue sustainable development, especially if you bear in mind that the ultimate goal of a company is to generate sustainable development? What does it mean to change our point of view in this respect? I would like to hear the point of view of a major entrepreneur, as well as president of Centromarca, which is one of the leading associations in this country. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for your kind words. I'm not a great entrepreneur. Actually, I've basically dealt with tomatoes. I've continued my activity, and I've also done with, and I've recently started doing another business, which is that of Centromarca. I believe that the combination between profit generation and sustainability, profit generation is actually at the very core of the life of businesses, is very important. In this respect, especially at the national level, we consider profits as something negative. Our Christian culture has often led us consider profits as something wrong. But in fact, we should consider the way in which profits are generated. Profit generation is the way in which our society progresses, meaning it pays more taxes, that is to say, it has more resources that can be devoted and put to use for the benefit of the health service and other, for example, infrastructures and so on. But it also has gives us the chance to generate wealth inside the company, and this can be done if we are more competitive. So, of course, as an issue related to profit, but that has to be well understood. Maybe we're kind of rediscovering the wheel here, reinventing the wheel. But there was a major entrepreneur, Adriano Olivetti. Actually, he was really a great entrepreneur, and this sensitivity, this care, this attention was very profound in him. And basically, he spoke with his acts, with his actions. And here too, we have to be very careful about the way we narrate what we do. One thing is narrating what we do, another issue is doing precisely what you do, so acting. In my view, one cannot play a social role unless you start from your own organization. And this has to deal with the way with which we help our collaborators grow, our suppliers grow. I come from a world that has very close links with agriculture. So the ability to respect agreements with the agricultural field, to give value to the work produced in agriculture, to, in a way, come out of a social and economic role, and then paying attention to the way land is tilted. I mean, this is something, this is a role that has to be played. And then from there, you have to start expanding. But first and foremost, you have to start from your inner circle. It is as if that were your own family. It's useless that you do good outside if you do not pay attention to your own family, to your inner circle. And then there is a role, which is the role and the respect for the environment. And I'm saying this not because it is fashionable. Probably this stems from my family, from the culture I derive from my family, and actually also from the work I do every day. Every day we have to assess climate change and the impacts of climate change on the quality of the raw materials that we use. That's pivotal. And then the community, the broader community. And here plays we have another subject that basically plays a fundamental role. What's the connection between companies and our own community? Sometimes we have companies which are highly processing companies, and they tend to create, sometimes they generate disservices. And this has repercussions on the community. But we have to clearly identify precisely this. And I may provide you with a number of data. As Mutti, we are currently building a place. Actually, the company is based in the countryside, and we're currently building a place in a wonderful architectural facility which will serve as a place for interactions with our community. So we're supporting centers for the elderly or local schools. We're supporting them and installing these facilities with, for example, geothermal energy installations. I mean, all of these aspects are becoming very important. Furthermore, for example, we're supporting an association of volunteers called Croce Azzurra. And the idea there is to protect them in a moment of difficult economic situations. So there should always be a constant balance between a generation on the one hand, and then the way, the generation of economic profit, and then the way that you distribute profits. And then it's more or less the activity of a state. The state can decide whether to give more weight to subsidizing or to supporting. And the same thing has to be done by companies. Companies have to be constantly able to allocate their own resources. And this means not only because companies have to continue generating profits, but also because we aim at generating something that is much broader and much more impactful than the generation of economic value.
Alla dottoressa Farina.
To Mrs. Farina, I want to ask the same question about insurance and insurance companies. So we know that now we have educational support, care, and that can be assured as well. I had some surgical operations, and if I had no insurance for that, well, I should have to postpone I mean, all these surgical operations. But fortunately, thanks to my insurance, I could have these surgeries earlier. So, I mean, insurances are becoming something new, different, are becoming part and parcel of welfare. So we've talked about banks and companies, and now let's talk about insurance companies. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I want to say that I'm really, really sorry for not being there with you, but I had a little accident and I broke a bone, so I can't move around. So I do apologize with the organizers, and I do apologize with you, the minister, and all the other reputable guests and speakers for not being there with you, as well as so to the audience. So I'm really sorry for not being there. Well, that said, as to your question, I must say that as a matter of fact, well, banks and insurance companies play a key role when it comes to the development of a country. Insurance companies cannot reallocate wealth, but still they can do something when it comes to risk management. And I'd like to better illustrate what I do mean by that. And I'll make some examples. For instance, let's talk about health, and let's talk about welfare. And we know that many additional resources are needed to properly manage welfare, and sometimes, I mean, there's a major lack, and the public data is pretty unbearable. So we know that the situation is difficult. So it's hard to find additional resources for welfare management, and so it's really hard to find enough resources. And so I think that considering the current circumstances, I mean, we need to try to figure out alternative ways. And this is exactly where insurance companies come into play. And this applies to welfare and health care management, but not only to that, because there are possibilities of collaboration with the state, provided that public-private financing solutions can be found. So it is possible to somehow find co-management solutions relying on insurance companies. This means that in case of major risk situations, so a person can rely, I mean, on this cover, because of course we know that if something is not covered by the state, people have to go deep into their pockets. Instead, thanks to these specific, solutions that can be found between insurance companies and states, people can somehow have better and wider access to services, and with some sort of, specific and special conditions. So risk protection is part of insurance companies' DNA. And these new models and patterns are certainly to be envisaged more and more for the future, because this kind of solutions are to be found for the future in order to somehow support people when they have to pay privately for healthcare management services, but also welfare services, and they have no money. And let's think about natural disasters. I mean, there have been recently so many natural disasters, and even in the region where the meeting takes place. And again, today, the state is the only player trying to provide for the citizens being heavily affected by such natural disasters. And sometimes we know that the timing is not ideal. So with the public-private partnerships, including the state and insurance companies, certainly things could change for the better and for the benefit of citizens. So, of course, there should be agreed upon procedures and transparent procedures, and in particular, there should be a special focus and emphasis put on the conditions and also about the compensation being paid for. And so many aspects should be properly and duly taken care of, but this is possible. So this sort of mutual sort of approach, and Italians do not like insurances. I mean, we lag behind in the ranking of the most insured countries, and that brings about, a certain level of vulnerability for our country, because if people are too vulnerable and not enough insured, it means that, they risk to somehow come across serious financial problems. And again, this is a fact. We should try to manage in a serious and transparent and sound way these sorts of public-private insurance partnership. That would be the way in order to help people and households and companies being better protected. And this would be, certainly for the benefit of the whole country, because if you are less vulnerable, you are stronger, and you do not have to be afraid of possible future financial issues. Well, let's now move on to a second round of questions for our guests, and then we're going to connect with Minister Giorgetti. So this second round of questions is about another aspect. So we have talked about the common good, but now let's talk about something else. What could be the relationship between your entities and the state? I remember that when I was younger, very young, and more than 50% of the GDP was generated by the state. And then we moved to liberalism, and the state was seen as a demon, as evil. But which are the expectations of a bank when it comes to possible collaborations and partnerships with the state? Could that be foreseeable? So, Mr. Barrese, I come to you first. Well, I must say that these kinds of partnerships already exist. Maybe they are not well known, but actually, when it comes to the relationship between the banking system and the state, this is something that already exists. And there's a strict correlation. And for instance, the banking system tries to improve credit access, both internally but also for export purposes. And you know that there are certain risks related to companies, but also to destination countries, and you have guarantees that can be provided for by SACE or by the Central Fund, and I've seen also a hall here at the meeting about Invitalia that directly and indirectly supports the banking system when it comes to supporting new companies and businesses with risk capital, venture capital. So there is a strict relationship. And I mean, that got stronger and stronger during the pandemic, because during the pandemic there was a strong need of high cash flow levels for professionals, for companies, for businesses. And so that is why the state and the banking systems used the guarantee system in order to allow banks to allocate credit in very short times. And don't forget that companies were shut down in the spring of 2020, and they still had to pay for a lot of things. They had to pay, I mean, suppliers, they had to pay their employees. So thanks to this public-private partnership, I mean, you can really lay the foundations of so many activities. And let's not forget development and innovation. And for young people, finding a job is key, but also finding a house. And for instance, young people are supported if they want to get a mortgage to buy a house. So again, we have state guarantees that can be provided for, covering up to 100%. So the closer the collaboration, I mean, the smaller the knowledge gap or the risk gap, allowing a country such ours to properly develop. We have such a high potential, and in our case, the potential is strictly related not to natural resources, but instead to human resources, to, I mean, brains. And 50% of our graduates go abroad. So we somehow are affected by a major brain drain phenomenon. Well, we should keep these bright and clever brains in our country, because this is a need. We should do something to make these people stay here, and also try to somehow promote the birth rate. And again, many people are leaving this country because they do not see any possibility of a career. We have the best companies in the world, and still we have a major lack of employees. We have a lack of professionals. 300,000 jobs are still vacant. And I'm not just talking about sort of low-skilled jobs. No, I'm talking also about highly skilled jobs. So much remains to be done, and much can be done. Especially, we should not forget that we are all part of one single broad community. And so we all want our economy to grow, but an economy can grow only if you put people at the center of it. If you put their wealth and health at the center of it. You need to consider their safety and security, and we need to protect work. No future planning can somehow be done without protections, without insurances. So this country has a huge potential. This country, I mean, could do so much. And environmental issues are another central topic. We, over the last 10 years, we have reduced our emission level by 30%. We are the leading sort of contributors in not only Europe but in the world at large when it comes to reducing emissions. And again, when it comes to public-private partnerships. There are no contradictions. There are just synergies. So we need to somehow overcome clashes or considering the state as the opponent. When, we can be so strong in sports, and it's the same kind of team spirit. If people can collaborate also in other sectors, we can be the strongest, we can be the best. So we need more team spirit in every aspect of our economy. Then we become simply the best. So leave behind all sorts of negative storytelling. We are such a good country, and we could be even better. And so that is why we should not stop. We should stop the brain drain. We should encourage young, bright people to stay. And also that is why banks should do more to make these people stay. And those also who take advantage of public services, again, should be stopped. When it comes to healthcare services, we should consider those who are most in need, because there are people who simply cannot afford proper and suitable healthcare services. This means being part of a large community, the best in the world. Let's not forget it, because the world started from here, from Italy. Let's never forget that. So I have a similar question for Mr. Mutti. So what could the state provide to a company to help it grow? Well, first of all, I think that we should have a more holistic vision of our economy. We should see it as a whole in order to better consider its potential. Very often we have a scattered vision. Instead, we should go deeper and carry out a deeper analysis and consider our country as a whole system. But first, we need to better define what Italy is. Well, Italy likes to think about itself as a leading country in the world, but instead we are a small country. We represent less than 1% of the world population, 0.6% of emerged lands. We're very, very small, but still our economic role is so much more important and meaningful. So our ever-changing economy pushes us to understand what we want to do. We need to understand which is the place that we want to have in the world. It all depends on our willingness, on our wishes. So Italy should really somehow get clear ideas about that. And we have no natural resources. We can't compete on price as a key argument. There are countries in the world that are much more competitive when it comes to, low price products, and that will last for many, many years. So that is why Italy needs to emphasize what it does at best. So being able to create excellent, top exclusive products, the best ones ever. And this is our mission when we talk about made in Italy. So we need to target high quality products, excellent products. And if you want to offer the best and premium products and services, well, that goes through how we work, the people we employ, the way the state interacts with companies. It depends on the way the state imposes its own rules, because if you have a big, huge world brand, but then if you have people not complying with our laws and rules protecting that brand, well, then that the situation will end up in very unfair price competitions. And then we need to better protect our territory that has a sort of huge value. So we should protect it, first of all, because it is our own. Secondly, our resources are not easy to regenerate. When we destroy what we have instead of enhancing it, when we somehow do not properly care for our country, we destroy billions of value. Tourism depends on our ability to welcome people in dreamlike places. We should better protect our country. And well, what do I expect from the state? Well, first of all, I expect the state to create the proper conditions to, enhance and protect and preserve these assets. And again, we should stop exploiting our assets. We should enhance them, not exploit them. Italy cannot really embrace change if it does not also accept to provide a minimum salary to its citizens. And also on top of that, we really need to do something to retain thousands of graduate young people who are now living the country because they do not find opportunities for their future. This is, the leap that we should carry out. And it's not just about complaining, and it's not just about, trying to see a gloomy picture. It's all much more about something exciting. We need to decide finally to take care of our country, of our beautiful places. This is not something humiliating, not at all. This will lead to more value, to even better places, to even better situations and a better country. We need to retain these 300,000 young people living in the country. And they want to have to plow the land on August the 15th under a scorching hot sun. No, they need to find the proper opportunities for their future. So it's an exciting project. It is up to us to carry it out, leaving behind some obsolete mindset. And obsolete minds that are very dangerous. And well, we should try really to have a vision relying on a sort of better vision for our country. First of all, we need to get rid of contradictions and clashes. We need to, leave behind, political colors. Again, it's not a matter of political parties winning the elections. Generating wealth for everybody is the very first goal. We need to focus on the development once again, because development and growth lead to better employment and more jobs for everybody, so better management of services. So all that should be done in order to create the proper conditions for companies, in order to let them achieve the biggest growth ever. Because when it comes to wealth, it's not just about, making the rich even richer. It's about creating more wealth and redistributing it evenly among the population for everybody.
Farina nel suo...
So, Mrs. Farina, in your first answer, you already touched upon the need to integrate the insurance system with the public system. Can you please elaborate on that? Yes. I'll be happy to do that. Well, I would like to go back on the issue of growth, and then I'll move on to my answer to your question. One cannot underestimate, as Mr. Mutti has just said, that growth is a formidable tool to fight against poverty. But the fact is that today there are 5 million people in Italy who live in extreme poverty, and in 2006 there were only 2 million people living in extreme poverty. Back then we had a severe drop in the GDP, that's for sure. Now we are witnessing a recovery, but still there are still very poor people, and in such high numbers. A fact is that actually only believing in growth would be a mistake. A simplistic faith towards growth alone is not enough. This is a mistake that many intellectuals have made within the field of globalization. So it is not enough to kind of worship the GDP as an indicator to generate well-being. It's not enough to generate economic or environmental sustainability, or to create educational opportunities for everybody or access to care. Growth is definitely necessary for well-being, but it is not enough, because social cohesion aspects are then a fundamental aspect of the kind of country that we want to become. I think that we all have the responsibility of laying the foundations for generating a healthy growth. At the same time, we also have to find, again, a relationship between the economy and man and man's environment. I think that this connection between the economy and the individuals and man has gone lost, at least to a certain extent. It's important to combine the free market with human values. That's, however, very complex, but we should all work to achieve this goal. We should all go in this direction. This is a very complex task. But that's a pathway which, in my opinion, we should really definitely undertake. We need to push on growth. That's fundamental. However, in doing so, we should always place the individual, the person, at the center, because it is there that we need to be more decisive and more determinate in our decisions. So going back to the insurance sector, I am sure that the insurance sector can give a tangible contribution. We are going to witness an increasing welfare needs. Today, we have 4 million people older than 80 years old. In some years, we will have 7 million people in 2050. And this will, of course, require more assistance, more care, and undoubtedly, in order to be realistic, we need to be convinced of the fact that public resources will not be entirely available. So again, always focusing on this balance, on this integration between public and private sectors, we will have to go towards this combination between the public sphere and insurance companies. I strongly believe in this because insurance companies have major tasks. They have to provide protection against risks, and in doing so, they can provide also for better investments. And then there are other aspects related to investments, direct investments. Here, much can be done. Insurance companies have about 100 million assets, so they are major institutional investors, probably the largest, the biggest institutional investors that we have in Italy. And today, for example, as early as today, there are 80 million euros coming from the sector which finance our economy. Much more can be done if we could organize certain services together, and if this could include also investments to support the needs of the country. The NRRP will definitely represent a turning point, but the resources of the NRRP will not be enough for all investments, to perform all the investments that our country needs. Insurance companies can help in that respect with our resources and with an attitude which is based on collaboration, because our aim is to support the public sphere under the same leadership. Having the same vision and just one vision definitely improves results. And from this point of view, I'd like to say one last thing. I'd like to express one last concept, which is that of knowledge. In other words, we need to work a lot so that things improve, so that human beings are increasingly aware of his or her values. And an important value is represented by knowledge. In this respect, I very much appreciated the initiatives of the Ministry for the Economy, for example, on education, on the education of young people and citizens, including financial education. That also has a very important value. And therefore, we all need to, in a way, do our best so that this can take place as early as possible. On the topic of knowledge, there is an excerpt from John's Gospel that I like very much, which states, "You will know the truth, you will learn the truth, and the truth will make you free." So, real economic freedom, full emancipation depend on knowledge. And this is something that we should never forget. This is a concept that we should never neglect. It is the prerequisite, the fundamental prerequisite in order to grow with man at the center of the growth of our economy. Thank you very much.
Allora, grazie.
Thank you very much. We will certainly dwell over issues related to work during the meeting. This afternoon we have, for example, a session with the President of the Constitutional Court, Charra. But we have to involve Minister Giorgetti in this debate. Once again, thank you very much for participating in this session. On a personal note, I've had the chance to introduce him on many different occasions, and he's always had a merit. He's always basically demented what I said by saying very original things, and I'm sure today he'll do the same. In general terms, so he's not only a minister, he's a thinker. So my question to you is the one I started with. What does it mean to lead a ministry for the economy, having not only the GDP as a prospect, but the overall well-being of a country? I think everybody kind of obsesses you on the GDP and growth. What does it mean to have to adopt this new vision of development? Once again, thank you for your answer and for your participation. Thank you very much. Thanks for your understanding. I am currently in Treviso for the funeral of Lorenzo Paroni and Giulio Alberto Pacchione, the two finance officers who died. And I think it is correct to do so as the Minister of Financial Affairs. The topics you've discussed are always very interesting. I would like to thank the Rimini meeting for constantly offering these insights for reflection. I think the first thing we should do to discuss these topics is basically not to read the papers, not to follow the daily debate. For a few days, there has been plenty of proposals, and some of them are correct, some others aren't. Apart from this, I believe that we should first talk about the GDP. All the international and European indicators constantly make reference to the GDP. We know that this first started as a measurement parameter for the national accounting. So you can make reference to that also to include public expenditure, which does not promote development at all. However, this is what we have, and this is what we have to use. And it is, the GDP is an indicator that is not capable of grasping aspects related, for example, to the informal economy, what is produced inside the households, or it doesn't take into account the degradation of the environment that has become so important today. So my take on this is the following. If we think of development and of economic growth, I think that it is appropriate to add the term sustainable. Talking about sustainable today, development today, is normally induces people to think about environmental sustainability, which is, of course, paramount. However, if you consider the issue with an all-round approach, you cannot deny that the system holds if there is continuity between generations and if there is solidarity between the generations. The fact that there's a very low birth rate that I brought to everybody's attention years ago is, in my opinion, fundamental. There are no social security reforms. And there are no measures also coming from the insurance sectors that can kind of address the issue of the low birth rate. So sustainable development is an all-round concept that includes aspects, also aspects that are very they are mentioned but very rarely, and yet they are fundamental. As for development and growth, I believe that growth has to be generated, necessarily generated by companies, by businesses, and by being entrepreneurs. I would stress the word entrepreneur, businessman or businesswoman, because the concept of an entrepreneur is, in my view, something higher, has a higher ranking than the very concept of enterprise. So this dimension of the entrepreneur is central, and we need to, in this respect, start thinking differently compared to what we did in the 1970s, starting from the 1970s. So starting from the conception that we need to trigger public demand in order to generate development. In my view, we should concentrate very much on supply. The supply coming from companies and also from the point of view of work. The issue of work supply and of the quality of work is a fundamental topic, and that's also what guarantees the success and the good results of a company. So the workers work with and for an entrepreneur represent another fundamental topic to guarantee the growth of this country. But to do this, we need to create a favorable environment for the prospering of enterprises and for the setting up of new enterprises. And in this respect, I would like to address Mr. Barrese. Barrese addressed the role of banks very well today. So role of banks with the guarantees of the state, that's fine. However, my insight on this is actually to focus on the fair profit in the short to long run. So the question I pose is the following. Can the credit system within the framework of the new rules that we now have, can the banking system value the merit of entrepreneurs, those who renounce immediate profits, unlike some proprietary speculation funds? So people who indeed in the future who renounce current profits for the future assets. I mean, this is an aspect, this is an issue, sorry. And I could also address what Bianca said. I mean, I think that actually profit makers should not be shareholders of insurance companies. But actually this logic of trusting the entrepreneurs, trusting companies who are far-sighted, whom we should support is, in my opinion, in my view, the crucial element today. And this in a moment of great changes, of major changes, in which nearly everything is changing. So probably trusting only in the invisible hand of the market is not the right solution. So when Giorgio said, when Giorgio talked about the role of the state in the economy, I mean, that's yet another major issue that we should dwell upon. I mean, if you want, you can address that. I can address that immediately. Yes, please do, because it is clearly to be seen that, judging from your action, there is something new. There is a positive attitude to act in favor of development. This was not to be seen at the beginning of this century. And that is very much different from the period of the Erie State Company of years ago. So what's your new view in terms of the economy? What are we heading to? I believe that actually it is companies which are the driving engine of all the entire development. However, the invisible hand of the market cannot work in such a period. I believe, after these two prerequisites, that we should apply the principles theorized by Schumpeter, that of which is basically characterized by a change in paradigm. In these periods of change, the role of the public sector becomes fundamental in supporting the transitions and in promoting innovation and new forms of entrepreneurship. And in these dimensions, there are sovereign states, there are public realities which are more, in a way, functional to the generation of this development compared to others. So when you talk about our governments, if everything depended on our government, I would be entirely responsible. I would take on all the responsibility. But fact is that it is not only the state that plays a public role. We live in a reality in which, for example, besides the Italian government, we have the European Commission, then we have the European Central Bank. I mean, these are public bodies, and these are realities which inevitably impact on the daily economic activities. Suffices to think that, for example, compared to some years ago, compared to the years that you were talking about, the European Commission has completely changed its paradigm compared to the general clause that has not been applied over the last few years when it comes to the Stability Pact. And I hope with the Next Generation EU, the European Commission decided to bring about a major investment program supporting investments in digital areas and environmental areas. But that's also something completely new. The European Commission has been late after the United States of America, which basically applied a massive system of public subsidies for the industrial sector, especially for the sector which faces actually the digital transformation. And then Europe came later. But these are just examples to say that the role of the public sphere in these moments of transformation is necessary to maintain competitiveness at a global level. But the role of the public sphere becomes fundamental. It becomes, therefore, paramount that the public sector sides with the private sphere in building up a clear system of rules, that there are infrastructures, and that there are some political concepts that have to be followed, which are those of strategic autonomy. When we also forget the value of, so to say, high policy, sometimes it becomes difficult to understand processes, and then you end up lacking commodities for any type of production. And so we understand how important it is to guarantee technological sovereignty, not only for some productions alone. So the role of the public sector, which is which becomes more complex because of the presence of these other international subjects, is fundamental. And it's fundamental not only because we need to have these informations and because we need to have the resources. It is decisive. I mean, the way and the quality of these interventions become necessary. That is why the responsibility of the government today, more than ever, is precisely on these issues. So, for example, as regards these NRRP, we have resources. I mean, some of them are for free, others are to be returned, and they actually have to pay. We have to pay interest rates, and we have to use these resources as best as possible. So it's not just a matter that we have to do that we have to be quick in implementing the plan, but we have to do them well. It's better to do them well and then carefully analyze all the situations, because this is a unique occasion to promote growth and development, and also the reconversion of some enterprises, of several enterprises in this country. Nothing is for free. When we borrow money, we also have to think, we always have to think about sustainability. We have a huge public debt, and sometimes also the European Central Bank was to blame. But because of this, next year we will have to pay 15 billion euros more for interest rates rather than using this money for the growth and the real economy. Well, I think that this is a responsibility that a minister in my capacity, a minister for the economy, and that any politician should never forget. And when we use public money, when we ask for public money, we need to use them as best as possible. Our government is now approaching the budget law, the drafting of the budget law. It will be complicated. All budget laws are complicated. Also, the one we had last year was. As we are politicians, we're called upon to prioritize certain issues. So we will have prioritized interventions. We will definitely have to act in favor of low incomes, for example, reducing taxes, because inflation is reducing our purchase power. And at the same time, we will have to use the resources available to promote growth, to reward those who work and those who are willing to, in a way, to do their task. These are our guidelines, and this is also what we hope for, is that also measures are taken at the European level. We hope that at the European level, the importance of time is understood. So we're now exiting the clause that were decided during the pandemic. Unfortunately, the war is still waging in Europe, and this, of course, influences also the fundamentals of the economy. So, for example, there's a very high inflation in Europe. There are very high energy prices, and in my view, that's very closely related to the situation in the Ukraine. So, when in Europe we decide over the new governance rules in Europe, I hope that the need is considered, and this is basically what Italy insists on. I mean, for us, it's not a matter of reducing the debt. We simply want investments to be treated in a privileged way and better compared to current expenditure, in line with all the things that I've said in my contribution. I mean, we cannot, at a time in which we're still living in exceptional times, we cannot go back to rules that ignore the need to support families and companies go through the major transformations that we are living. So I believe that the few months that await us will see the work of a responsible government, also financially, but a government which will definitely demand Europe to understand the sense of history and the sense of the moment that we're living. Otherwise, everything becomes more complicated, and probably it's going to be damaging for us as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I would like to conclude by thanking all our guests as a representative of the Rimini meeting and a representative of the Foundation for Subsidiarity. The idea is actually to wonder what new forms of economy we may have. We will never go back to state-based, state-supported economy, but the invisible hand of the market is also no solution. The selfishness of individuals in favor of the invisible hand of the market is not the solution. Probably the solution lies in kind of joining forces, and that's probably in the very sense of this meeting, because our friendship should not only be in the private sector, but also in the public sector. So we can all be saved together. So the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector represent subsidiarity for the common good. I think that this meeting, as well as actually the other sessions that will take place with other ministers as well, actually aim at providing a tiny insight in bringing forward a dialogue that is based on curiosity, which is willing to achieve the truth, as Father Giussani said. Thank you.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale. Non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Da oggi in cucina crea tu. Creo io. Sì, con Crea tu. Orogel crea i mix di verdure pronte tutte italiane. Tu crea tutto. Crea primi, secondi, contorni, antipasti e fuoripasti. Orogel crea tu. Crea tutto quello che vuoi tu.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa Sanpaolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.